Kevin Hunt with Jeff O'Brien here on the Business Forum Show, talking about business leases. And Jeff, is kind of your position that leasing is smarter than owning pretty much all the time, or in most cases.
Not necessarily. I think that when a business is just starting out, I think it makes total sense to be leasing rather than owning. It's just one less headache you have to worry about.
Sure, sure. So let's talk about the reasons why somebody would want to lease and some of the problems involved in leasing, or things to watch out for.
Well, leasing, most businesses need to, unless you're a home-based business or a consulting firm, most businesses need a location. And so, you got to have a space. You got to find a space, a business location, right? And like I said, whether you're owning the building or not, there's going to be a lease involved, because even if you're owning it, for liability reasons, you're still going to be leasing it to your operating business too.
Sure.
But and commercial leasing is an interesting area. There's mounds of statutes dealing with residential leases and all the rights that tenants have and landlords have and what they can do and all that. But there aren't any when it comes to commercial leasing. Commercial leases, there is residential leases, there's statutes, it's more of a consumer protection issue. In commercial leasing, you're assumed they're both business people, they know what they're doing, they're sophisticated enough, they're on their own. And so all the more reason to be using an attorney that knows leasing to help negotiate that, because there's always things that can be revised one way or another in a lease. And believe it or not, yes, there are some leases that are drafted more landlord friendly and some that are more tenant friendly. It just all depends as to who starts with the document. And so whoever I'm representing, it's my job to ferret out the issues and try to do the best I can to protect my client.
So what are some of the common things that you think get missed in leases? Because I even think about, and maybe this is one of the areas that cover as well, but maintenance of the building, or if you get big, depending upon the size that the place may be, who's going to take care of, even simple things like clearing the snow and whatnot.
Well, that all relates back to what type of lease you have, and there's two types. They're called gross lease or triple net lease or net lease, and that usually defines who's responsible for it. A gross lease, the tenant is paying a fixed amount of rent every month, and the landlord is picking up the tab for utilities, property taxes, maybe some of the maintenance stuff, because what they've done is, in theory, set the monthly rent amount such that it's enough to cover all those things. Okay, if it's not, the landlord's going to bear the risk of any overage.
Sure.
Okay, a net lease or triple net lease is where these costs are passed on to the tenant or tenants of the property based on the percentage of the building that they rent. So if you have, say, a strip mall, all the businesses that are in the strip mall are going to pay some percentage of the cost of keeping the sidewalks clear, keeping the parking lots plowed, keeping the grass cut in the summertime. All those things are called common area maintenance expenses. Also, we refer to them as CAM. You hear about CAM charges. That's what you're talking about. All those maintenance expenses for all the grounds and the parking lots.
The common area maintenance.
Yep. So, obviously, if it's a single tenant building, then the one tenant is going to be responsible for all of that. So typically, a triple net is the property taxes are passed through pro rata, utilities, insurance, all those things are passed through pro rata, and then the CAM charges are passed through pro rata. And a good triple net lease will define what the CAM charges are. And that's a real key for a tenant, is going through that list and finding out what the landlord is calling CAM charges. And I've had provisions where I've redlined out, management fees or administrative expenses. There's all different things that could be considered operating expenses. Just a matter of what the parties agree on. Again, back to my earlier statement, it's a product of negotiation. So you negotiate what you want, what you're responsible for. Now, CAM charges are different than, say, repair like capital repairs. Most of the time, the landlord is going to be responsible for the roof, for any structural repairs, heating and air conditioning. That's depends on what the parties agree on. Sometimes it's the tenant, sometimes it's the landlord. It all depends. But that's another point that gets negotiated, is who's responsible for repairing. If there's boilers in the building, who's responsible for repairing those if those break. If I'm a tenant, if I'm representing a tenant, I want the landlord to be responsible for that. If I'm representing the landlord, we're going to try to get the tenant to be responsible. We're going to try to minimize our expense as much as possible.
Sure.
Because we're already paying, the landlord's already paying, a mortgage. We want to be able to pass on as much of the expense of maintenance onto our tenants, because that's why we buy commercial real estate, because we know somebody will rent it from us.
I've seen these two terms before, and that makes perfect sense when you're describing a triple net lease, and how, for example, in a mall situation and whatnot, those would be quite appropriate. What's a good example of where a gross type lease is most appropriate?
Gross lease, I mean, it doesn't really have to be a particular type of property. It's more of a landlord's preference. If it might be that the landlord just doesn't want the hassle of having to provide itemization of what the expenses were, trying to estimate all this stuff, or having some adjustment at the year end, or audit rights where the tenant could come in and audit the books. The landlord would just say, to heck with that, I don't want to do it. It's X. I've calculated out myself. This is
Here's what all these expenses kind of averaged out, and I'm comfortable doing that.
Exactly. They could say, we'll set up the utilities on your dime. Here's what you're going to pay for the rest of it. We're done. It's more of a determined when the parties decide they would want something. In my opinion, the gross lease is a little bit may not be as exact as a triple net, but it might be simpler in terms of how it operates.
So there can be advantages both ways.
Correct.
Kevin Hunter with Jeff O'Brien here on the Business Forum Show, chatting about business leases, and good stuff to know, Jeff. I wouldn't have thought there'd be so much involved in negotiating a good lease for your business.
There's all that and more.
Again, Kevin Hunter with Jeff O'Brien here on the Business Forum Show, chatting about business leases versus owning, and gross versus triple net leases. You can contact Jeff O'Brien at jobrien@loman.com. Again, that's jobrien@loman.com with your additional questions. Kevin Hunter with Jeff here on the Business Forum Show. Thanks for listening.